This podcast series will examine the empirical research on pornography consumption and its potential effects on men's mental health, relationships, and well-being. And each episode, I'm going to explore different aspects of this topic, featuring research findings, expert interviews, and practical insights. But I should probably welcome you first before I dive in. And I just want to say thank you for listening. Welcome to the Men's Mental Health Substack, a podcast where I explore the intersection of psychological science and everyday life of men. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Bates, and today we're going to begin a series, like I said, looking at the research, the science on pornography consumption and men's mental health. And this topic affects millions of people. Sadly, it's affecting more young people now than ever. Some of the fastest rising demographic of those who are viewing pornography, and I think to hazardous, horrible outcomes. But let me get back on topic here. This is a topic that's either sensationalized or just altogether avoided in public discourse. So my goal is to present a balanced view on the current scientific understanding. I don't want to be sensational, outrageous, clickbaity, but I also want to be truthful and honest and give this topic the seriousness it deserves. So like I said, this is going to be a series of podcasts, hoping maybe 5-6 episodes, each topic, or each episode looking at a different topic related to this issue. And like I said, I really want to get into the research. I want to understand not just the overall impact, but looking at specific constructs like men's psychological well-being, relationships, behavior, sexual functioning, intimacy, love, how men really show up for, I think, the best parts of life. And I think porn gets in the way of those best parts of life. So, because, like I said, before I jump in, again, I want to emphasize this is educational, not judgmental. So just listen with an open ear. I'd say just listen, not with the expectation that I'm going to come down on you or judge you or criticize you or moralize you. But this is a learning opportunity for you just to get more information, more context about what role, if porn is in your life, what role does it play, in ways that it may be disrupting you without your understanding. Or maybe you do feel a sense of shame about it. And so also I want to give you the keys to freedom, the tools to get out of the pit that you're in. And so you construct each rung of the ladder as you go. Or you fly the plane, you construct the plane as you're flying it. I don't know, lots of different metaphors we could use here. So let me just dive right in. So let's start with a definition. So what do we mean by pornography? And in examining the prevalence of it. So let's get into definitions and how widespread the problem is. So researchers typically define pornography as sexually explicit material, primarily intended to sexually arouse the audience. That definition comes from Hall and Malamuth, in 2008. I always butcher names from citations, so apologies to those researchers. They've done excellent work, and I'm just ruining their names. The content varies widely from professionally produced videos to amateur video and content, images, written material, and virtual experiences. I guess something also that's kind of to include in that is like revenge porn, where people will post things of an ex or someone they want to embarrass. And that's pretty pernicious and done in ill will to shame and embarrass that person. But I also saw a reel where they were talking about folks will put the image of someone, just a totally innocent bystander, and take their image that maybe they uploaded to Facebook or something, and then that gets attached to a pornographic AI video. So there's all sorts of technological ways to get access to pornography, whether people are consenting to it or not. According to a recent study, approximately 70 to 80% of adult men report viewing pornography at least monthly, with 30 to 40% reporting daily or nearly daily use. And you also have to think about, and that those numbers come from Grubbs et al. 2022, and you also have to think about the issue of underreporting, so maybe that's higher. And then you also have to think about all the kind of other ways that we're exposed to sexually salacious, arousing content too. It's just so prolific in our culture. So these rates have increased substantially since the advent of high-speed internet. So you don't have to go through all these gatekeepers to get access to porn, and you don't even have to pay money. It's just out there on the internet, on social media that you wouldn't expect it to be on. It's just out there. So that is the accessibility, the technology, the freeness of it, the lack of expense. It is invading and encroaching on virtually every aspect of our lives. And I've seen some historical kind of commentaries, whenever there's a big technological advance in humankind, usually the first application is something pornographic. Cave drawings, well, then you'll see sexually explicit images, or VR that's been used for pornographic purposes. Social media, video games. Video games are now full of very sexually explicit material. So pretty much it's just proliferated. And then you take into account smartphone, also accessing content through our handheld devices, which have made access to this kind of content nearly instantaneous, private, and often free. It's worth noting that pornography consumption varies across age groups, with higher usage typically reported among younger adults, so that would be the 18 to 30 folks. However, longitudinal studies suggest that consumption patterns can change throughout life, affected by relationship status, life circumstances, and personal values. And that comes from Perry and Schiefler in 2019. That's their study that looked at that. Okay, so let's discuss what's the neuroscience research. What is that telling us about pornography consumption and brain function? So numerous studies have examined how viewing pornographic content affects neurological activity. A significant body of research is focused on the brain's reward system. So that's things like dopamine, which is kind of simultaneously the motivator to go seek rewards, but also involved in getting a sense of reward from doing a behavior or an activity. So the way porn interacts with the brain's reward system involves dopamine signaling in areas like the nucleus accumbens and the ventral tegmental area, VTA for short. These regions are activated during sexual arousal, including when viewing pornography. Some researchers have proposed that frequent pornography consumption may lead to habituation. So, our nervous systems, our brains kind of operate on two primary mechanisms: sensitization, which is you get a response from the stimulus, or habituation, which is a reduction in the response to repeated stimulation or stimulus. So essentially, as habituation works, the ante has to be upped, so to speak. So to get a reward, maybe to simplify things, think of the law of diminishing returns. I think that's from economics, right? So the more you do something, the less pleasure. To quote Freud, the pleasure principle. We all want to avoid pain, maximize pleasure, but there's kind of a paradox within that. The more I seek pleasure, the more my behavior is motivated to maximize pleasure, the less pleasure I'm going to get in return. So that requires us to kind of increase the dosage, so to speak. I have to, and not just increasing the dosage, the type of dosage, the novelty, the intensity of the stimuli in order to achieve the same level of arousal or satisfaction. So I have to keep seeking more, kind of the way folks who struggle with addiction, they call it, chasing the dragon. So maybe that means I view porn for longer periods of time. I view porn for different time periods, different time periods in the day. Maybe I kind of break a taboo and I watch it while at work, or I watch it on the subway. So I'm doing all these kind of external things and internal things to create novelty. Maybe I watch different types of porn that's maybe taboo or risky. All sorts of things to just keep getting that sense, that payoff, that sexual payoff. But I have to keep introducing more and more things. And so, I've worked with couples, I've worked with clients where that's led them to some pretty hazardous behavior, some pretty harmful behavior. When they're kind of chasing the dragon, they have to keep doing things to greater lengths. And so any kind of behavior like that will come with some costs. That's going to cost you if unchecked, especially behaviors of this type, sexual. When we have a lot of laws and we have a lot of social norms and there's relationships at stake, it just comes with a really high price. Okay, so this process that I'm describing to you shares some neurological mechanisms with those seen in behavioral addictions. So behavioral addictions, think of things like a gambling addiction. For the longest time, we have conceptualized addiction as something that involves a substance and, drinking. So drinking alcohol or using drugs. That's been kind of the idea, the conception of what addiction is. You have a bad relationship with those substances, and you have to use more to get the same high. You continue to use it even though there's negative effects. It impairs you from functioning and carrying out daily activities. It starts to inhibit you achieving your goals. It impacts your work, your relationships. You're getting less benefit, yet you're spending more time and resources on it. It's starting to harm your health. So all these ways in which the classic understanding maps on to this new understanding. Yet we're just removing one element, which is the alcohol and the substance. So it's all the same kind of behavioral mechanisms and outcomes, yet there's no substance and alcohol involved. It's a behavior. People are getting engrossed in these kind of destructive bad habits and bad patterns due to repeated use of a behavior. And we've seen that in movies where the wayward guy is hundreds of $1,000s deep into a gambling addiction, and the mob is chasing them, and so they have to go to great lengths to get money or avoid the mob or avoid consequences. I can't think of the movie now, but I'm sure I've heard of those stories or watched those stories. And so these same kinds of dramas are playing out with porn. And so porn's not innocent or a harmless activity. There are very serious and sad narratives being played out in people's lives. A 2014 study published by JAMA Psychiatry found that men who reported higher pornography consumption showed less activation in the brain's reward center when viewing sexual images, suggesting potential desensitization. That comes from Voon et al. In 2014. However, it's important to note that these findings don't necessarily imply causation. It's possible that pre-existing differences in brain function influence consumption patterns rather than the reverse. So, it could be, there's a lot of things to disentangle here. It could just be, there's other things going on that are causing that desensitization to occur. And so it's not a one-to-one relationship. It's not a clear causal relationship. However, those two things run together. They have what's called a linear relationship. So with increased use, you're having a kind of inverse effect where the pleasure is also being reduced. And so again, it speaks to that diminishing return and why people have to go to such great lengths to get some kind of pleasure. I should also mention that the neuroscience research in this area faces methodological challenges, including difficulties in establishing appropriate control groups and accounting for individual differences in sexual response. So there is a whole lot of issues with the neuroscientific research. In some cases, most of it's not worth even sharing because it's has a lot of methodological concerns around it. Brain activation is not always kind of the nail in the coffin. Like, see, there's more brain activation in this person's brain, or there's less brain activation, or these brain structures are now less reinforced. They're less myelinated, or they're more reinforced. Again, it's just not super clear, but I guess it's one piece of evidence that's worth noting. But you can also just ask people and get self-report data too of how they experience porn in their lives, and that's enough. They'll say, yeah, it's really destructive in their life, and then you look at their brain, and then you see less brain activation, and so you have kind of a convergence of evidence there. They say, I'm spending more time than ever viewing porn. I'm viewing porn 6 to 8 hours a day. And it's making me miserable, depressed, and anxious. And I get less pleasure than ever. And then you look at the brain study and see there's less activation in those brain reward centers when viewing sexual images. Okay, so there's some agreement there. There's some convergence there. And then you take into account other data where, the depression rates start increasing, anxiety starts increasing, and then they're more socially isolated. And so you start to construct this picture of all these pieces of data and what's the kind of the grand narrative that you can draw from that. So it's kind of a cumulative case, but it's still worth looking at those neuroscience studies, and I think that science is just going to get improved with time, but it's good to keep those methodological concerns in our frame. All right, so moving beyond the neurological effects, let's examine the psychological dimensions. I was kind of touching on those a little bit before. So research has identified several potential psychological impacts associated with pornography consumption. Studies have found correlations between higher levels of pornography consumption and increased symptoms of depression, anxiety, lower overall psychological well-being in some men. That's from Yoder et al. In 2005. However, these relationships are complex and often bi-directional. So maybe the more depressed I am, the more likely I am to look at porn to make myself feel good. But that bi-directionality, we should also just kind of think of that image in your mind of a line with two arrows, right? Those two variables are interacting with each other, and one can lead to the other. The chain of causation can go either way. One leads to the other, but also kind of start to turn that and think of a spiral. So the more those two things are kind of bi-causally interacting with each other, that person's overall mental health starts just unraveling and spiraling down and down and down and down. So psychological distress may lead to increased consumption as a coping mechanism, creating a potential feedback loop. So yeah, think of a feedback loop. But again, my clients who I work with, they'll just describe it as a downward spiral where things just continually get worse. Self-perception is another important consideration. So some research suggests that frequent pornography consumers may experience issues related to body image and sexual self-confidence. So you've got this unrealistic, idealized, hyperbolic fantasy in those pornography productions, and they're not real life. They're just not real life. Men and women just don't look like that in real life. They don't perform like that in real life. And sex is not like that in real life. Pornography is just the most extreme, the most outrageous. It's kind of the way social media has hacked our brains, which is in order to capture your attention, it has to be very extreme content. Well, pornography works on virtually the same mechanism. In order to capture attention, it has to be extreme pornographic acts and images and body types. And so you start to internalize that, and you realize, well, I don't act like that, or I don't have that body or that physique or that stamina. And so now your sex life, your intimacy, your connection with your partner, your spouse, becomes all that less exciting and joyful. And so it robs people of joy. Comparisons is the thief of joy. It steals your joy. And so you have this kind of constant tape running in your head of, this isn't that super spectacular sexual experience that I just saw on the video. And now I'm having a sexual experience with my partner, and it's not that. There's no fireworks. It's not this huge, outrageous, exciting, crazy sexual thing. And so you can see how that kind of eats away. And, I think, too, pornography, it just sticks in your head. So you don't even have to be consciously aware of, I'm going to compare this sexual experience with my partner to what I just saw. You don't even have to be thinking in conscious terms of that, but it's still going to creep up in your mind. So men may compare themselves unfavorably to male performers, leading to a performance anxiety or concerns about their physical attributes versus just truly being in the moment and truly sharing something special and beautiful and joyful with your partner. That's kind of robbed and taken away. Because I think that whole idea of performance anxiety is incompatible with intimacy. The intimacy is what creates kind of the psychological safety to truly relax and be with your partner, and that's just no longer on order because of this whole performance piece. And maybe even a more negative turn to that is judging your partner, scrutinizing them just as much as scrutinizing yourself. A particularly important psychological factor is what researchers call moral incongruence, the distress that can arise when behavior conflicts with personal values or beliefs. Studies by Grubbs and colleagues have found that when men consume pornography, despite believing it's morally wrong, they experience greater psychological distress than those without such value conflicts. So, there's a lot of shame that men experience around consuming porn. So, in my head, I may truly believe in the bottom of my heart it's something that's not good for me, and yet I engage in watching it. And so that's creating kind of a cognitive dissonance, a deep sense of shame that I'm engaging in something that I find, morally wrong. And so there's a value conflict there. There's psychological distress that results from that. And then that can lead to inauthenticity, incongruence. The experience of incongruence can lead to social isolation. There's a great one-liner from AA. I always quote it to clients, and I just totally steal it from AA. So I don't know how to give proper attribution to AA, but I'll do it now. But the maxim is, you're as sick as your secrets. And so really the best disinfectant is to put these things in the light, to come out of the darkness, and talk with your significant other, talk with your church community, your faith community, seek out your rabbi, your imam, your pastor, seek out just a mentor. If you're not religious, but you still feel that internal conflict, seek out a mentor, seek out a leader, seek out someone you respect, seek out someone who's living the life that you aspire to. Seek out a counselor. I've got a lot of men who have sought out counseling for this very issue to a wonderful outcome. There is hope. There is freedom. So, I've had a lot of men seek out counseling, and usually what we find is these sexual issues and pornography issues are kind of the canary in the coal mine. And this is related to a whole host of other issues: trauma from the past, hurt, wounds, depression, anxiety, poor coping skills, mechanisms. And so just seek out help. You can't solve this and overcome this in isolation. No man is an island. So, sunlight is the best disinfectant, so you got to step into the sunlight and get support. You're only as strong as your community. I know these sound like cliches, and I'm just kind of firing them off. But these are memes, in a manner of speaking, mental health memes, and they really do affect the way you think and the way you behave and the way you feel. So I would say kind of take those memes that I'm kind of just spitting out rapid fire and start to construct a new schema around porn. So if I think, what do I think about porn? Well, porn makes me feel shameful, and it makes me be secretive with my behavior and my use. Okay. And I'm feeling miserable. Okay, I'm sick as my secrets. Boom, apply that meme right there. That's my new meme. This secret addiction or consumption is making me sick. Okay, so what do I do about it? Sunlight is the best disinfectant. So I have to start taking this from the darkness, out of the secrecy, and put it into the light. Expose it. Exposure to others who are trusted. And that could be a religious leader. That could be a mentor, family member, spouse, partner, or a counselor. Okay, so now my behavior is motivated to take action. I've got to do something with this new idea. So that's the meme. The meme's helping me get a new behavior that's going to then produce a better outcome, right? To throw a couple more cliche maxims, axioms from AA, if you want something different, you've got to do something different. You can't expect a different outcome with no changes in your behavior. Try a new behavior. Try a new way of approaching this. If that means reaching out for more social support, then get more social support. If that means contacting a counselor, go get a counselor. If that means going for a cold shower, get the cold shower, go work out, try new behaviors. Because you might just be sick and tired of being sick and tired. All right, let's see how many AA axioms I can throw in this one podcast. If you want something different, you have to try something different. Okay, I'm getting off track now. Let me get back on track here. Another critical dimension is how pornography consumption affects men's relationships and social functioning. So I was just kind of hinting at this. A substantial body of research has examined associations between pornography use and relationship satisfaction, intimacy, and sexual behavior. So a meta-analysis, that's where they look at a lot of different studies. Maybe they'll start with 1,500 studies, and then 25 of those studies are homogeneous enough so that they can pull them together and then look at outcomes across those 25 studies versus one study. Because one study in isolation is not that powerful. Maybe it hasn't been replicated. Maybe it has some odd novel findings, but 25 studies, now we have a high degree of confidence in those findings. So that's why you do things like meta-analyses. And then let's say one study had 300 people. Well, 25 studies now has 7,000 people, right? So the power of the effects that we're observing are all that more evident when you pull them across 25 studies. So let me get back to what I was saying. A meta-analysis by Wright and colleagues in 2017 suggested that higher pornography consumption is associated with lower relationship satisfaction in heterosexual couples, though the effect sizes are typically small to moderate, which is not anything to shake a stick at. A small to moderate effect is still an effect. And I think, too, again, you've got to take into account the variability of how folks perceive secret pornography use. If a partner is secretly using pornography, some folks can say, oh, okay, no big deal, wish you'd told me. Or it can be devastating. So there's a degree of variability to take into account. I know for folks in religious communities, the impact of secret pornography use is going to be much more severe than those who are not in those religious communities, for example. These effects appear more pronounced when consumption is kept secret from partners or when one partner objects to the other's use. Some studies indicate that frequent pornography consumers may experience difficulties with intimate connection. So sexual performance certainly takes a nosedive. Men can have issues with erectile dysfunction. Things with arousal, those kinds of issues, but then just also the intimacy and feeling safe and close and connected with each other, that takes a hit too. Researchers have theorized that this could be related to unrealistic expectations about sexual encounters or partners, comparing real life experiences unfavorably to pornographic depictions. We kind of touched on that already. It's important to note that research also shows that mutual open use of pornography by couples sometimes can enhance the sexual communication and satisfaction. For some couples, for other couples, that's not the case. But that is fair to say. Pornography is not just de facto relationally devastating. Some couples find ways of navigating it, and they kind of incorporate it into their relationship. So context and communication appear to be pretty important as a mediating factor, which is a third variable in the relationship between those two variables, right? So variable one, let's say the independent variable, we could also call it, that would be the porn use, and then the dependent variable, the outcome variable, and that would be sexual connection, or relational satisfaction. And so you could say, well, there's a negative relationship between those two things, but you add a third variable, which is partner communication and perception, and that mediates that relationship from negative to maybe positive, to neutral to maybe positive. So it matters how it's perceived and how it's discussed and the approach you take with your partner. All right, so as I conclude this first episode here, I want to emphasize that individual differences with pornography vary widely, as I just kind of mentioned. The research findings I've discussed represent statistical trends and correlations. They're not universal outcomes. We didn't really touch on anything that's truly a strong causal relationship. But the caveat I would give is I did mention evidence from meta-analyses, and so that does increase the power of the evidence. And so I do stand pretty firmly by pornography. In my mind, and in my perspective, seems to be a net negative. When you take all things into consideration, all things being equal, it's a pretty strong negative for most folks. And if it's not a negative for you, then that's great. But in my mind, I really advise people to limit it, to reduce it, and to cut it out altogether, because it just seems to wreak a lot of havoc. But many variables influence how media consumption affects us, including personal history, values, relationship status, consumption patterns. So, this is not the end of the story. There's so much more to get into. And so in my upcoming episodes, I want to go deeper into specific aspects of this topic, including the concept of pornography addiction or compulsivity. So I very briefly touched on that, but that's an area of debate. How pornography may shape sexual expectations and behaviors. Again, just very briefly touched on that. There's so much more to discuss. That really does deserve an episode in its own right. And then potential impacts on motivation and goal pursuit, approaches to healthy porn consumption, and personal stories and clinical perspectives. So I also might be able to interview someone who has more expertise in this area than me. So that'd be great if I can find somebody. So, cross your fingers. And then if you'd like to learn more about the research I've discussed today, please check out the citations I'm going to be uploading to this podcast. And then I really value your feedback and your questions. So please reach out to me through Substack, message me, let me know if you need resources, or if you want to contribute a comment to me or your perspective. I think that'd be really helpful. And then thanks for listening to Men's Mental Health, my Substack. I'm, again, your host, Dr. Daniel Bates, and I'll be back next week with another episode on this topic. All right. Thanks for listening.